Hello, everyone. It's amazing to be here. The energy is great, and I'm very happy to be discovering Prague, and then I'm very happy to be speaking to you about this. I picked a very important topic. I've been following the network state movement around since 3 years ago. We set up specifically to support network state movement and founders. We're legal engineering firms. My background is more a lawyer, so I'm more of a bridge with the traditional system, but hear me out. So I argue that the most important question we have right now, including for the network state movement, is that can civilization scale without collapsing sovereignty? And I'm not speaking about nation-state sovereignty, right? That's delegated sovereignty. That's not direct. So we have the raw innovation capacity already exists. We see it in here in the room. There's builders coding. What we have right now, we have the building blocks. What we do not have right now, we do not have the blueprint. It's very important that we learn from history, and it's very important that we balance things out. So when I started looking into this, it's like, what is the law of the network state? What would I do as the building blocks for the law of the network state? And I started like, okay, can I look at the legal innovation in history? Can I start with Akkad? Can I start with Egypt? Hopefully you're seeing this. It's quite, okay. So essentially, it's like Akkad managed to scale in a record time. Like 50 years, they pulled together fragments, and they, emerged into a very well-run system, which is like dual language, coordination, improvement in terms of legal. They have nested sovereignty. They have nested jurisdiction. They were actually the ones that invented like dual jurisdiction. They invented like, oh, this is for military court. This is for the civil court. They should be separate. In Egypt, we had Ma'at limiting power. The pharaoh was responsible for keeping the cosmic order. He was not giving the cosmic order. This is very important. So how do we learn from the human history and do not abandon, the acquired gains of civilization? And then I started to think about, it's like, okay, what would be the building blocks? What would be the modules of a, I don't know, maybe planetary level system, maybe solar funk future that we're building together. And like the first thing that came was agency, the capacity to choose under constraint. This is not absolute individual sovereignty because we do act within constraints. But this is eroded if cognitive sovereignty is not preserved. The subject of this talk is governance with human and AI teams. And we are noting a reliance or an over-reliance on the outcome of AI already, right? I've been speaking to co-founders of legal firms. I've been speaking to people who are concerned because their employees, their contractors, people who have a lot of experience, they are starting to second-guess their lived knowledge in favor of the output of an LLM or a second LLM or a third LLM. If you compare the LLMs, they don't tell you the same things because guess what? It's not the truth, it's predictive. The second building block that came is law as invisible coordination technology shaping choice. And this is very important because procedure can help scaffold individual rights and agency, or they can help suffocate it, right? It's like Miranda warning versus Kafka's castle. And people do not actually see the systems they are living in, and they become accustomed to those systems. If we were able to model and see the invisible systems that are constraining our choices and freedoms, some of us would be scared. Some of us would rebel. Some of us will decide to do better architecture of these systems. So this is very important. Law as infrastructure, not just law as, I don't know, agreement or contract, like that, those are important, but law is infrastructure that's supporting society together. Third item, third module, I would argue, we have to consider our values. So what are values? When I started doing this work, I had a vague idea of like, oh, we should actually invent a new theory of value because we need something else in this transition to a network society, to a network state. And because of those researches, I ended up looking into philosophy, looking into things, talking to various people in these pop-up environments. You've heard a little bit earlier about the study of pop-ups. You've heard a little bit earlier about what are different values that these different societies are embodying. They could be different depending on the project. So values are, we all have almost the same values, but not necessarily in the same order. And this is where a lot of conflict comes from, because when we have different value hierarchies, the costly trade-offs are like the moment we actually live by our values, right? If it doesn't actually cost us something, if we just like say we value signal, it's not really a lived one. So bias is also the shadow side of value. And for the agentic systems, this is very important to debunk, right? A lot of the concerns right now are like, okay, we have to remove bias from the agentic systems. Good. We should remove bias from the agentic system. But we have to understand that the source of bias is that we had certain values that we built into those agentic systems in the first place, and there is no way to completely eliminate any and all bias, because there is no way for humans to not have values. They will always have a set of values that they care for, and this is a good thing. Fourth building block, I see the economy as stabilized value flows without extraction, or at least without extraction is what we should be aiming for. And then I challenged a little bit earlier the notion of money as a transport layer. So value flows are stabilized, then we have markets that are able to price those value flows. Like if those values are legible to the market, then they will be priced, and then money is the transport layer that moves things around. But imagine that we have different dimensions of value. Imagine that there are things that the markets cannot actually price. Those are invisible, and because of how the economy is currently constructed, those things don't get funding, and we know this very well in this community. So short-term thinking narrows perception, depletes the substrate, simply because of architecture. It's not because, oh, humans are so evil, or powers that be are so evil, or there's someone up there in the cloud. In many, many cases, I don't deny that bad actors exist, but in many, many cases, it's the architecture itself that's the problem. And the architecture can be changed. And this brings me to the information architecture module. This literally came in last, and it's a very important one because information architecture shapes perception, which shapes cognition, which shapes our actions and our choices. So your reticular activating system will be working against you if you're living on a platform, if you're interacting with an agentic system that feeds you false information, or at least information that it's not the one that you're, that's tailored to your values, to your goals, to your objectives. So again, these building blocks should be considered. And then I decided to run a few experiments because what I could see happening is that, well, all these different traditional systems and worlds are converging because of the agentic systems and because of how human and AI teams are coming together now. So consultants, traditionally, they relied on their expert judgment and experience. Now they're doing Claude co-work, right? They're building their agentic workflows and systems. So they're influenced by what's built into the Claude thing. Law firms are doing Harvey, Legora, and all sorts of legal tech so that they can, speed up their work. They deliver cheaper work for their clients with good intentions. But again, there's this AI influence that's being built in. The AI systems, like Gemini, is now embedded in Google Workspace. And then in terms of risk and prediction models, we could talk about traditional actors, insurers, but many others. And we will increasingly see agentic prediction models. If you don't know what Mirrorfish is, this is the closest thing to the metrics that I've ever seen in terms of using fish schools and many agentic systems to simulate human behavior. And then coordination is just agents for delegation, agents for curation, algorithmic feeds. We already know that. So I decided, okay, what is the experiment I run? This is what I listed here is just the first one. I also ran a self-experiment in terms of with AI entrainment. I'm going to speak about it later. But this one is in terms of what is built into these agentic models. Claude, Gemini, and Lumo. I didn't touch OpenAI, firstly, because it's quite controversial, and secondly, because I was using it also to run the experiment, so I didn't want to have bias. Lumo comes from a very, Lumo is the Proton AI agent, so it comes from a very sovereign perspective. Gemini is the one that's used by tech developers a lot in the US because it's simply embedded into Google Workspace, and now with Gemma 4 being available to run locally, that's also very interesting for builders. So I wanted to compare and contrast these three, and I invite you to run these prompts or similar prompts if you want, because the outcome is very interesting. So Claude gave me the most elaborate, sophisticated response. Like very, very sophisticated, very procedural, very enterprise grade, very professional. But it was kind of Cartesian, not a lot of soul into it, right? So this is like, which probably is the reason why I don't usually work well with Claude. But in terms of like, this is how it came out. And then Gemini, it's a very integrative model, and it has other issues. And Lumo is a very fragmented model because its bias is towards sovereignty, not towards unification. So it's very interesting to explore in terms of like, okay, depending on which population uses which agentic system, which model, there will be additional leverage, additional enforcement of their personal biases or personality, or additional biases that they don't know about, or additional flavors that they don't know about. So the question becomes, the question is literally about what are we building into the system, and if all these systems are converging, they are converging towards what? I don't want to speak the word singularity here, but I didn't want to put it on the slide, but I will say it. So how do we solve this? So first of all, we have to get out of this mindset that tension and conflict are bad, right? We all have to converge towards something, we all have to agree with each other, and this is the way to go. Because literally, nature is diverse for a reason. Like, diversity is the superior strategy in terms of long-term evolution outcomes. We have these differences in values, principles, and cultures for a reason. The idea is to be able to learn how to manage conflict better, so that instead of like fighting each other in lots of ways, we can simply sit with that tension in this tense, gritty model that actually exists in architecture, so we should actually learn from it. In terms of strength, comes from balance and not rigidity. Rigid systems break under stress, but flexible systems that hold attention and have the ability to hold attention will be much better off because they will preserve the diversity and they will have a dynamic stability. An ethical system should reveal the tension, so I should be able to see as the AI agent, as the agentic system is thinking, reasoning, right, I should be able to see what's baked in, and I should be able to influence that. So because we're in a community of developers, I wanted to talk about, like, okay, what can we build for this? So forkable governance is already here, right? That we should have public audit trails and governance provenance is kind of obvious because we need to investigate, and then again, this is the right community for that. Multi-agent constitutions, in terms of maintaining that diversity of thought for the agentic system, this is an important one. I mean, we should have multiple perspectives for AI agents. The second cluster is about value and cognition. I would argue that instead of thinking proof of work, proof of stake, we should track proof of value in multiple dimensions. What is value? Like, each community can determine their own values, their own KPIs, and start tracking that, and then become very clear in terms of, like, we were talking about the future of DAOs just earlier, become very clear. It's like, okay, how is a newcomer able to contribute immediately? How are they able to immediately see what's needed, what's required, what's value adding versus value destroying, and that this also allows them to be immediately operational. My biggest challenge when I started working with DAOs, and I have a professional interest of sticking with the work, it was like, how do I navigate emergence? I'm a professional, I'm very busy. Right? As a lawyer, it's very difficult. It's like the time investment to explore a DAO and its operations and to get into the system deep enough to bring real value, that's big investment, that's a trade-off. So in terms of like how do we attract more people into the DAO ecosystem, well, this is how. We make clear visibility. We make it visible for them. Cognitive sovereignty is a very important thing that I want to discuss here, and then the anti-entrainment. So we can work with entrainment on purpose. Entrainment is what? Is that the AI is so fast compared to us, the agentic systems are so fast compared to us that, like, look at me how I speak fast, right? Because these systems are coming up with outputs so fast, we don't actually process them very well because our capacity is limited. We are human. We get overwhelmed with information. We're getting FOMO'd out, right? We're being fed all this sort of data, keeping track. The world is getting bigger and smaller at the same time. It's like, can we build our own agentic system that serve as our own articulate, like reticular activating system so that they filter us and they help us see what we want to see and what we want to explore, and not what other people, the platforms or whatever, want us to see and explore. And data dignity is also important. I want to object to the human subject. I know that it comes theoretically. The GDPR argues that to be a data subject is to be, you know, the actor. But really, if you think about sovereignty, the data subject is still a subject. It's still under power over dynamics. So it's not the owner of the data. It's not the sovereign. It's just the subject matter, right? So I want us to get out of that. And then certainly I want humans not to be the raw material. So how do we make the informational boundaries? How do we design the architecture so that the systems serve us instead of us being, you know, the feed? And then finally, the sacred commons, because there are certain spaces, there are certain categories that shouldn't be on the market, right? We shouldn't have markets for these. And therefore, because we don't have market for these, they're not being priced in the current economic models, and they're not getting funding properly. So we have to actually protect these spaces differently. I was talking about tension and tempo earlier. So tense-gritty meetings is like descent vitality. It's like exit viability. Is it really a real exit, or have I invested so much into the system and there's so much barrier and I'm going to lose so much by leaving that I don't actually have a valid choice of leaving and of opting out? And then Caroline was speaking earlier about opt-in, opt-out jurisdictions. This is the truth. Like, most countries today have an exit tax. Right? You decide to leave, they tax you on a lot of money. So again, what is the metric that we want for health in terms of staying with that tension and then being mindful of those trade-offs? My God, I'm actually quite emotional right now. Slow governance layers. So again, slowing down the pace of the machine so that it serves us, and then getting grounded in nature. So nature as anchor is very important. It will keep us safe. The pace will be accelerating, and if we go with it, we're going to be dragged around by wild horses, quite for the next few years. So slowing this down and then sort of like designing better models for ourselves, and then deciding that what is the model for the human and AI co-agency that we want to have, because AI has the potential to be a scaffold, right, for us to support us because of those. Let's say, administrative duties that are overwhelming and so complex, and the AI can just take over that, and that will be so great, but that we need to retain nuance, sovereignty. So I'm going to just go over very quickly. Right now, most of the people are the AI governance infrastructure, human in the loop. The human in the loop actually is very illusory because of this entrainment and this automation bias, and we're seeing this, like, people are believing in, is like someone who has the authority. If you tell them, like, someone has vetted this agentic system and it's compliant, they will trust it, right? They don't, especially if the tempo is high. And then Ethereum community can serve a lot about designing agentic systems governance, and then, you know, how agentic systems work in governance. But then lawyers, and this is where I come in, like, we do need to build this institutional trust as well. We do need the bridge with the traditional system, because most of the world doesn't live on chain. And they still trust the traditional systems. So the important reframe that I would do is that right now, the big decision makers, even the UN AI working group or whatever, is like, how do we control intelligent systems? And then we want to be building this. This is done with AI. I think it did a good job in terms of mapping this out. And then, yeah, so replacing AGI governance, and like, let's not talk about AGI governance. Agentic systems are still computer systems. And you guys can actually be the best position to build sovereign, preserving, coordinating infrastructure. Thank you so much for your attention. We have 3 minutes for questions, if there is one question.